Hi. Hey guys, what's up? My name is Dom. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my channel, I typically make bookish content, movie content, and anything else in between because I like to do whatever I want on this channel, and tonight's going to be movie content. For today's video, we're going to go over all the movies, TV shows, and musicals that I watched in the months of February and March. There is a lot to talk about. We got 16 movies, 3 TV shows, and 1 musical, so I am just going to jump right into this. So the Oscar seasons were upon us back in February and early March, so I was trying to watch as many Oscar-nominated movies that I could. So the first movie I watched was one of the Best Picture nominees, Tar. This is about a conductor named Lydia Tarr. She's a world-renowned conductor, and the story is essentially her downfall. It is the artist's downfall. I gave this movie 4.5 out of 5 stars. I was actually really shocked how much I liked this movie. First of all, I'm always a sucker for the artist's downfall trope. Quite frankly, I think the main reason I love this movie so much is because Lydia Tarr is played by Cate Blanchett. Her performance in this movie was astounding. She is Lydia Tarr. If any other actress were to be in this movie, I probably would have thought this was really boring. Something about Cate Blanchett, she is so entrancing. She always, everything I've seen her in, she always just grabs me in, and I'm convinced every time. This movie included, and quite frankly, when it comes to this movie, it actually took me a solid 20 minutes to realize I wasn't watching a biopic. That's how good Cate Blanchett was, especially that interview in the beginning of the movie, just her mannerisms. Like, I thought she was mimicking another interview, but no, she was just, that was Cate Blanchett acting, and it was astounding. People do nickname this movie Cancel Culture the Movie, and I guess, and I shouldn't say I guess, it does kind of explore that, but again, I want to more so call it the downfall of an artist, not necessarily cancel culture, because it is a person. I hate the term cancel culture because what it really is, it's someone facing the consequences of their own actions. And I love the way the movie did it, just because how it shows Lydia growing, her fame growing, where she hits a peak and then finally her downfall. And there's actually a scene that I think of. There's one scene in the movie, however long it is, it's just one continuous shot. And I loved it. I was very engaged in that scene, but I did notice it was like the one scene that had that, and I was really confused as to why, and the way they brought it back was so clever, and suddenly the fact that it was a one continuous shot sort of scene made total sense, and I thought it worked really well. And I had a neat time watching Lydia Tarr go from where she started all the way to the end point of the movie. The end point causes a lot of controversy. I don't really want to get too into it because I would have to spoil the movie in order to talk about it. But the way I perceived it, I perceived that to be Lydia Tarr's point of view. I think too many people were watching this movie in their own point of view, and that's probably why there's so much controversy, but I thought it was pretty clear that's not how we were supposed to perceive it. It was how Lydia thinks of herself. And as much as I wanted Michelle Yeoh to win the Oscar for Best Actress this year, I was rooting for her and she ended up getting it. If she lost to Cate Blanchett, I would have been okay with that. Actually, Cate Blanchett was the only actress I wanted Michelle to lose to if she had to lose. And that's all I have to say about Tar. The next movie I watched is another Best Picture nominee, and that is The Banshees of Inisherin. This movie takes place on an island in Ireland in the 1920s, and it's about 2 guys, Paddick and Colm. They were best friends, and then one day Colm decides he doesn't want to be friends with Paddick anymore. This is another movie I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's one of those movies where I was enjoying the movie while watching it, but I didn't realize how much I actually loved this movie until I finished it and had time to sit down and process my emotions. It's a very simplistic story. There's a lot of deep meanings, which I think is why I liked it so much. For such a simplistic story, it's a very deep meaning. I think everyone has gone through a situation similar to this where someone we thought we were really close to just decided they didn't want to be friends with us anymore, and that hurts no matter who you are. And I felt so bad for our main character Paddick because he contrasted with Colm. Paddick was known as kind of one of the nicest people on the island, while Colm not so much. I mean, Colm wasn't hated, but still there was that contrast, and Paddick, he was seen as sort of dim, whereas Colm was not, and Colm wanted like a huge future too. And it was just interesting watching all these grievances happen, and then contrasted to the beautiful setting, because I know a lot of people, myself included, I love the countryside of Ireland. I think it's beautiful. So I did like seeing that contrast, and just the fact that it explores like a lot of issues that are kind of kept hush-hush in Catholic communities, such as sexual assault, rape of a minor, drinking, I mean, just the fact that they weren't getting along anymore, and it kind of sort of became everyone's business just because it's a small town. There's a lot of lessons and ironies in this movie. One of the lessons is that sometimes you do need to learn to let go, and then the end of the movie shows what happens when you don't let go. But it also brings up the argument, do you have to let go? or is it okay to have these emotions? And that I don't want to get into because, again, spoilers. And I also like that how there's two other characters that contrast, Colin with Siobhan. I think they contrast because both of them want better futures for themselves, and it's just interesting how both of them handle that. Being stuck where you're at or actually taking the measures to fix that. And then there's a lot of ironies that come up in that because someone in this movie wants this grand future for themselves and ends up ruining that future all by themselves. And I thought it had a really heartbreaking ending. It shows that sometimes things can't go back to the way they are. You burn bridges and can never rebuild those bridges. Like The Great Gatsby said, you can't repeat the past. And that was one of the many takeaways I took from this movie. The one question I have for this movie is I was wondering if there were any significance to the Irish Gaelic names. Because I did notice in this film most of the characters have like anglicized names, whereas our main character, Padilla, has a very Irish first name and an Irish last name, and then his sister's name is Siobhan. So that is my one question. I do have an idea about it, but in order to discuss it, I would have to spoil the movie, and I don't want to do that, so let's move on to the next one. So the next movie I watched, I went to theaters to go see it, and that is M. Night Shyamalan's new movie, Knock at the Cabin. This is about a family who are vacationing, and then 4 people come to their cabin and tell them, you have to decide which person in your family is going to die, because if you don't, the world is going to end. What can I say? It's a Shyamalan movie. I wasn't expecting much, and yet I was still disappointed. My biggest gripe with this film is that this film was not the movie that was advertised to me. Because I saw the trailer a few times in the theaters before and sometimes on TV, and every time I watched it, I thought these commercials were telling the audience that these 4 people are going to end the world and this family has to choose who are they going to sacrifice, you know, like I just said. However, when I actually watched the movie, turns out the plot of the movie is actually having to guess if the 4 people are lying. And I thought that was bizarre because it's like, you told me in the trailer they're not lying. You told me in the trailer who they are. So what's the point? And there's a lot of dialogue that just kind of drove me crazy. It's M. Night Shyamalan. The guy doesn't let you make any inferences for yourself. He has to tell you, he has to explicitly state everything. I mean, there's a whole speech at the end of the movie where Jonathan Groff is like, they're the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And it's like, okay, thank you. Everyone in the theater figured that out 10 minutes into the movie. And I also, spoiler alert, I also figured out who was going to die right away. Having said that, I did find myself kind of invested until the end. However, I guess the rest of the theater did not, because that 1 second of time, you know, when the movie ends but the end credits didn't start just yet, that 1 second of time, everyone, and I was in actually a fairly packed theater, everyone in the theater sighed and immediately got up and bolted. No one stayed during the end credits. No one wanted to sit through it, and I was like, I didn't even have time to process what was going on, and suddenly I was left alone in this theater. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars just because of how invested I ended up being in, but also all my gripes in total. And I should have just done the smart thing and waited until this movie was on streaming if I really wanted to see it that bad, because movies nowadays are way too fucking expensive for this. The next movie I watched is another Best Picture nominee, and that is Triangle of Sadness. This is about a group of rich people who go on a cruise. Also, my food is here, so I'll be right back.
So come on, folks, let's join the band as we all head for the refreshment stand.
Okay, so Triangle of Sadness. This film, I can't even tell you what my star rating for it is, because I still don't know to this day. This film had a lot of excellent commentary. They couldn't be any more explicit about their commentary on communism, but the biggest takeaway for me was just their commentary on social class and how your social class does determine how you're treated by others. In this film, there was many hierarchies of people. You had the ultra rich people who were guests on this cruise ship. Then you had Woody Harrelson, who was the captain of the ship. Then you had all his employees. But then you had the custodians, who were a level under. So the employees were treated like garbage by the rich people, but then the custodians were treated like garbage by the employees, and they were completely ignored by the rich people. This film had some of the most jarring differences in acts I've ever seen. Usually when it comes to movies, I always have a hard time breaking my silence here. I always have a difficult time determining when, like, Act 1 starts and Act 2 begins. Like, that transitionary period, it's always hard for me to determine for some reason. This one cannot make it any clearer, and it had one of the most bizarre second acts I have ever seen. And it's one of the most disgusting second acts I've ever seen. I know movies have trigger warnings, but I wish those trigger warnings were, how much is this movie going to make you want to puke? Okay, as someone who's so sensitive to vomiting, whether it's seeing it or smelling it's the worst. That's like my one trigger. The moment I see vomit, I have to look away or I'm gonna vomit too. There was a point in the movie where everyone was just violently seasick for 20 minutes. Everyone's fucking puking. There was fucking diarrhea. The toilets were exploding. People were literally swimming in this dirty ass water. I kid you not, I almost had to pause the movie to get up and vomit. Like, I actually nearly hurled. I somehow held it back. My hand was on the remote and I was like mid-stance to get up when I finally just collected myself. But I was watching the movie like this and it lasted for 20 minutes. The scene was 20 minutes long of this. So for 20 minutes I was just staring at a screen like this, like through my fingers or doing like one of these things, because then I had to listen to them vomit. Absolutely disgusting. However, despite being violently sick watching this movie, I do love seeing rich people in their flop era. And I shouldn't even just reduce the movie to that, because it's not just like social classes and like rich people facing consequences. It's more so also a commentary about positions of power as well, because there is one character and she was like the star of this movie. She stole the show. She was a custodian, and it was interesting watching her transition from that custodial role where basically everyone was ignoring her to when she was the captain of the group, and how that affects her by the end of the movie, how it affected everyone else throughout the movie because suddenly they lost their position of power to her, and how that kind of just essentially bit her in the ass by the end. That's basically all I have to say about Triangle of Sadness. Do not eat anything watching this movie. That was the other thing that happened to me. I ordered food and it didn't come until the seasick scene happened. So I had just eaten and then everyone started vomiting, so I almost vomited up my dinner. So that is my warning. If you are sensitive to vomit like I am, proceed with caution with this film. But that's how I feel about Triangle of Sadness. Still don't know a star rating. I don't know if I liked the film, but I definitely did not dislike it. Around this time on Twitter, a lot of people were talking about Emma Roberts' teen drama era, or teen flick era, I should say. So I decided to rewatch a movie she was in that I used to love as a kid, and that's Nancy Drew. Nancy Drew is the famous literary detective, and in this one, she moves to a different town, moves into a house with a mystery. This was the movie me and my friends always watched at sleepovers, and watching it now, because I don't think I've seen this movie since middle school, watching it now, I was like, I can't believe I loved it back then. However, the target audience, which are 10-year-olds, seemed to love this movie, so I guess it did its job. I will say my childhood crush is in this movie. He plays her friend from River Heights. I used to have the biggest crush on this man. And have you seen what he looks like now? I would still risk it all for this man. He aged so well. He matched my taste in guys back then, and he still matches my taste in men now. So then the next movie I watched was the 1930s version of All Quiet on the Western Front. The remake was nominated for an Oscar this year. However, I had not seen this one, so I wanted to see this one first before ever touching the remake. Plus, this also won Best Picture back in 1930, and I am trying to watch all the Best Picture winners. So this story is about a group of German boys who join World War I, thinking it's going to be some grand adventure, and they quickly learn that that is not the case. This movie is based on one of the most famous, if not the most famous, anti-war book of all time by the same name, which I have read years ago, so I went into this movie already knowing all the major plot points. This is honestly one of the saddest war stories I've ever consumed. I had a depressing end, because usually when people are like, oh my god, the movie or book, whatever, what have you, was so sad, there's still that like sense of contentment at the end, but not this story. This is just depressing all around. I feel like it really highlighted how scary war actually is, especially for the young men who actually have to fight the wars, because when they showed that in the movie, like all these older men telling these young boys like, fight for your fatherland, fight for your country, fight for the country you love, fight for these ideals that I have, and yet it's the young boys going to the war and not these older men who actually have these ideals, and then they're trying to tell these young men what the war is actually like and what they should and should not do, which really pissed me off. This movie made me cry and it made me angry all in one sitting. I cried for all the friends, and I got angry at those scenes that I was just discussing. And the tribute at the end of this movie, just the two different scenes in one single frame and how they did that to make you feel for these boys, I thought that was an excellent way to pay tribute to these characters. I ended up giving this movie 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I watched The Sea Beast, which was nominated for Best Animated Feature, and this takes place in a world where humans fight off these sea beasts, and then this little girl who wants to be an explorer realizes maybe these monsters aren't as bad as they thought. I thought this movie was cute and fun. It has one of my new favorite tropes. I realized lately that I've been loving the trope where some guy adopts a kid, which is essentially what happens in this one. You have a spunky main character who is adorable, but she's orphaned, and then the guy who does not have a wife or anything, doesn't have kids of his own, takes her under his wing. I did find the plot to be predictable. Within like the first 5 minutes, I knew exactly what the moral of the story was going to be. However, that's not really the fault of the movie. This is more so a kid's movie, so that is just me not being in the target audience. One of my favorite things about this movie was the character designs of these monsters. The one gripe I had with it is that they did introduce a plot point and then just never brought it up again. It was important for those 2 seconds and you thought there was going to be some repercussions. Never again. But I ended up giving this movie 4 out of 5 stars. The last movie I watched in February is another Best Picture nominee, and that is The Fablement. This movie is semi-autobiographical. Steven Spielberg is the director of this movie. The Fablemans is a fictional family, however, they are inspired by Steven Spielberg's family. It's essentially a coming-of-age story, and the main character, Sammy, or aka Steven Spielberg, using movies to get through and process life. I went into this movie with high hopes, and it reached those high hopes. I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I had a really good time with this one. I thought the acting in this movie was amazing. The mom is played by Michelle Williams, she was very, very in your face. And like, I want to use the word obnoxious, however, it didn't bother me. You kind of almost felt for her and knew very well what she was going through. Paul Dano played some guy. He played the dad, but I've never seen a movie with Paul Dano in where he's just some guy. Usually he's a weirdo. And the guy who played Sammy, or aka Steven Spielberg, he did an amazing job. And I'm actually shocked he wasn't recognized this Oscar season. And the scene that really stuck out to me for Sammy was near the end where he sticks up to himself with that bully because he faced a lot of anti-Semitism at his new school. Well, and then even before that, just dealing with his mom, what his mom had done to the dad, trying to get through that, just trying to get through typical teenage years. The bully also did a good job, and just watching the self-doubt go across the bully's face. We all face through self-doubt. And it just made me so nostalgic for my teen years and just growing up and like remembering times where I had a hard time processing my emotions. And that's what I like about coming of age movies, just watching different ways teens learned to process emotions, and then this one was just different because he used movies, which I've never seen in other films before. And despite all these heavy emotions I felt watching the film, I still felt very happy and content by the end, which is a sign of a good coming of age film. It's the hurt comfort. I could honestly see this film winning Best Picture in another year. I just think there were too many strong contenders this year. And I'm not saying that just because I was heavily biased towards Everything Everywhere All at Once. That was my #1 choice. But it also was up against Elvis, which is a biopic, and Oscars love biopics, especially about dead people. It was up against All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a war movie, and the Oscars love war movies. That being said, though, if I had to tier rank all the Best Picture nominees, this would be my second place. So I really enjoyed this one and highly recommend it. So the first movie I watched in March is Babylon. This movie takes place at the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s and explores the silent film era and then the beginning of the talkies and how that affected different people in the film industry. This movie was a fucking ride. I know a lot of people were pissed it wasn't nominated for Best Picture, and I know it flopped at the theater, so I was like, okay, y'all got my attention, I'm intrigued. So I started watching it, right? This film is absolutely outrageous. And I had no idea going into that. I should have read some type of warning. But it was outrageous. Within the first 5 minutes, an elephant shits on the camera. And some guy has a piss kink. And they show a woman peeing on him, and he's turned on by that. And there's a ton of nudity within those first 20 minutes. At one point, there's a close-up of a woman getting her ass clapped, and I'm pretty sure some frames has some dicks flapping around. And I was like, what the fuck am I watching? So this film is absolutely outrageous, and I love it. This was one of my favorite movies of the year. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I was okay with all the debauchery in the beginning. Once I realized that was essentially the tone of the film, you quickly catch on to the fact that they're just at a typical party of the 1920s. I had a lot of fun with the first 20 minutes. The first hour or so was really, really ridiculous and outrageous, but the first 20 minutes was a ride, which leads me to my next point. I think this movie handled tones very well. So that first hour is outrageous, over the top, people screaming, playing fancy party music just because that's how the 1920s were. But then once the film enters the 1930s, the tone actually comes down a bit and it's not as raunchy. In fact, it becomes a lot more conservative. But that's because that's how the 1930s were. And I think it does a really good job showing how it affects people, and not just actors, because I feel like we're always talking about actors when it comes to this, but then it also showed how it affected different directors, how some transitioned very well, some couldn't handle it at all, the introduction of sound to films and how people were treated with that. And then the biggest one were how musicians were treated, and not just any musicians, but African American musicians. And also did a good job of showing how different eras want different personalities. For example, Nellie Leroy, played by Margot Robbie. She was just an outrageous person. Everything she did was highly exaggerated, which is why her acting worked for the silent film era and why she rose to stardom. But the 1930s didn't like that. They wanted her to be more quiet. They wanted her to be more conservative. They wanted her acting to tone down because now she could talk. But that just wasn't who she was as a person, so she had a very hard time transitioning over to that. Also, Margot Robbie, I love her. Her acting was amazing in this, and it just makes me think of that scene that was going around on Twitter for a while where her character's like throwing shit and she's screaming, and everyone was like calling it bad acting, but this movie just shows that you have to watch the fucking movie to see the context, because in context, Margot Robbie's acting was perfect. That is 100% how her character would react to that situation. So I think she should have been nominated for an Oscar. But that's just me. This movie also shows you how those silent films were made and how they just had different sets of productions on one plot of land. Like, that was really cool, and how the title cards were made. And then when they showed what happened to Nellie Leroy and then Brad Pitt's character, I thought that was really well done. And it made me sad, but it really reflected what actually happened to these people. Because I feel like nowadays when we talk about movies, we forget about old school Hollywood, and that a lot of these movie stars really couldn't make that transition just because that's how different talkies were from silent films. It's like, it might as well, we consider them the same medium because they're both movies, but it's like they might as well be two different mediums. Also, this movie is 3 hours and 10 minutes long, which when I saw that, my jaw fell to the floor because I was like, y'all want me to watch this movie. This movie did not feel that long at all, and I mean that in the best way possible. That's how much fun I was having with this, so thank you. Whoever worked on the pacing of this movie, y'all did a great job. And I'm gonna say it, I think this movie was robbed for production design and score at the Oscars. I was fucking pissed when this got looked over. I think this movie got screwed over a lot. I can't believe it bombed at the box office. And when I say bombed, like, I mean people weren't going at all. I'm reading comments and people were saying they were in empty theaters. Like, why? Like, this movie was, I mean, I shouldn't talk. I didn't go to the theaters. I waited till it was on streaming to watch this. But now I regret that. I would have loved to see this on the big screen. I loved everything about this movie. I don't really have a major complaint about it. So yeah, if you can handle debauchery, especially for that first hour, highly recommend this film. 5 out of 5 stars. One of my top 3 favorite films of the year. Then I watched another Best Picture nominee, and that is Women Talking. This movie is about a group of women who live in a conservative religious community, and they find out that at night, the men of their community are tranquilizing them and raping them. So then the women of 3 families get together and decide the fate of these women, and that fate is whether to leave the community, stay and fight, or stay and forgive the men. This movie was a great movie, I should say. It was a very poignant film. And it's out of all this, like, simple, because that's what I would call it. I would call it a simplistic movie, if you will. It's one of the most important simplistic movies I've ever seen. They made a great use of one setting. This whole movie essentially just takes place in a barn. This movie kind of feels like a play because of that, so it shocks me that it's a movie and not a stage play, but I'm actually glad it's a movie because then I feel like it opens it up to a wider audience. This film is also an excellent example of show versus tell. I kind of hate to do this, but I'm going to pull, like, the sexism card anyway. I do feel like if a man wrote this movie, in order to show us that the women were raped, there would be graphic rape scenes. However, this film actually does not have graphic rape scenes. In order to show that the women were raped, the camera's like on the ceiling, and then you get a bird's eye view of the woman, and it just shows them waking up in the morning with blood on their pajamas in between their legs. And honestly, that tells me all I need to know about what happened to them. And I do think this movie is an excellent portrayal of how trauma can affect people differently. Every woman in this film kind of had their own way of processing what happened to them. One woman constantly had panic attacks. Rooney Mara's character, who as much as she disliked the men, she still saw the good in everyone, and she did think there was a future for the boys and hoping that they could be better. Her dialogue when it came to this topic could be a little on the nose, but I still like what she had to say. Then you had another character played by Claire Foy. She wanted to stay, but she wanted to stay and physically fight these men because that's how angry she was. You had another character, Tom Cruise's lookalike, who she wanted to stay, but not because she wanted to fight the men. She just wanted to stay because she was so scared. And I feel like in any situation, that is how diverse the reactions are going to be. And this movie made me angry, but it's clearly supposed to make you angry, so I figured it did its job. Oh, and this film also had some dialogue that I wish myself I could have written. There was another line that I loved, and it's someone saying, "Sometimes I think people laugh as hard as they wish to cry," and that was a punch in the gut, especially in the context of that scene. If you're in a good mind space to watch this, because I know this topic could be extremely triggering, I do recommend seeing this film. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It's one of the best films I'll probably never watch again, just because it's a hard subject matter, but it was done really well. So the last film I watched before the Oscars is called After Sun. This was nominated for Best Actor for Paul Mescal. This is about a woman who is reminiscing on a vacation she took with her dad because this vacation was the last time she saw her father. When watching the film, I wasn't really reacting to anything. I was just kind of taking in the scenes as they happen, and I would like chuckle and smile here and there, what have you. But it's like I almost didn't feel anything watching the film, but for some reason, the music to the end credits hit me like a fucking truck, and I just sobbed. I bawled my eyes out for 30 minutes straight after finishing this film, and I had to get up, go in the other room, and tell my dad I love him. That's how this film affected me, and I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars. And if you read some of the reviews on Letterboxd had me crying. You can tell it's very personal to the director, and just the way it's written out, just the way the flashbacks bounce off each other, and just the final shot of the movie and how well done that was. It's so sad because this person's trying to reminisce on what happened to her father, because again, it's the last time she ever saw him. And we never find that out. We never find out why he left or what caused him to leave, but just because of the imagery used and our characters' mannerisms, you can guess what happened. And I think this movie is an excellent exploration of depression, because this guy, as much as he loves his daughter, he just clearly became a father way too fast and way too young. He simply wasn't ready, and it's like he's just one of those people where despite being a good father, no matter what age he is, he definitely would have excelled if he had his daughter at an older age. This movie makes me fear for the day my dad has to leave, you know? Oh my god, I'm just thinking about it and reading some of those reviews. And the use of under pressure in this film too, that scene was a tug at the heartstrings. My main takeaway from this movie that yes, on the surface it's about a girl on vacation with her dad, but then the deeper meaning is that this story is about a dad who wants to give his daughter the world but unfortunately can't afford it, and he feels bad about himself because of it. And then it's about a girl who doesn't want the world. She just wants her dad by her side. And I guess you can also argue this film is also about the moment someone realizes their parents aren't Superman. Like, I feel like we can all remember a time where we realize our parents are flawed human beings. I get so emotional when it comes to music. The music at the end is some of the most tragically beautiful music I've ever heard. It makes me feel like I am by myself at a beach and it's nighttime. I'm sitting where the sand meets the water, hugging my knees to my chest and trying not to cry. That's what the music feels like. And I'm getting really somber and philosophical about this film, so I'm gonna move on before I start crying again. But again, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars and I really do recommend it. So the next film I watched was a silent film, and that is Wings. This film is the first movie to ever win Best Picture at the Oscars. And it's about 2 guys fighting in World War I, and then the girl next door is in love. I'm not going to get into this movie just because I did react to it, so I don't want to rehash anything. I do want to say though, just one interesting fact is that Nellie Leroy of Babylon was actually based on the silent film actress Clara Bow. And it's funny because Clara Bow is in this movie. She plays Mary Preston, and I did not know that until after I had already watched this film and I was in the editing process. I did give this film 3 out of 5 stars.
So come on, folks, let's join the band as we all head for the refreshment stand.
Yes, I'm filming this on a different day. Anyway, the next movie I watched was in theaters, and that is 65. This is about a guy who was sent on a mission, but he crash lands on Earth, but it's the Earth of 65 million years ago. Now, he and the lone survivor, which is a young girl, have to fight some dinosaurs so they can get home. This movie is literally just okay. I took my dad to see it, and he has the same exact opinion, actually. It has the trope that I mentioned that I'm starting to love, where a guy adopts a kid. In this case, he adopted a girl. It was interesting that she actually couldn't speak the same language, so that language barrier was really cool to see and added some tension. And I actually really liked the use of shadows in this film in order to hide the dinosaurs, just because I feel like that created a tension I've never felt before with other movies. And there was no sound either, so just the eerie silence and the way shadows move, where like if you weren't paying close attention, if you blinked, you would have missed the attack, and it would have been a surprise attack, which a lot of people actually fell for in my theater. A lot of people were jumping and going in the theater, but whereas like I saw it coming. So I don't know if that's actually a good or bad thing, but personally I really like that. And there was enough going on to keep me entertained. I do want to mention the runtime for this film is 90 minutes, and it is the perfect runtime, just given the pacing this movie had. If this movie was any longer, it would have been way too long. I was literally getting antsy when there was 10 seconds left in the film. So good on them for being able to predict that. We love that. That being said, I did have some qualms with this that really brought my rating down, because like I said, it's just okay. I gave it 2.5 out of 5 stars. Despite the perfect 90-minute runtime, the ending left much to be desired. Both me and my dad, when the credits started rolling, we just looked at each other like, that's it. It was kind of a very abrupt ending, and I was waiting for more to happen. As much as I don't want them to make this movie longer, I feel like the ending did need more. So if there was a way to kind of re-edit or rewrite the ending, that would be swell. And it also needs more dinosaurs. I was very disappointed with how few dinosaurs they were, and they were all like the typical dinosaurs, the T-Rexes. And then I went into this thinking was gonna be like another Jurassic Park. I don't want to say another Jurassic Park, but like, in the sense with the dinosaurs, where in Jurassic Park not only are they fighting them, but they do like walk alongside them sometimes, and I wanted some of that. Like on their journey, I wanted them to walk alongside the herbivores, but it was constantly fighting the carnivores or watching these herbivores get killed. So there wasn't enough dinosaurs, and as a dinosaur girly, kind of disappointed. But yeah, I don't think it was a waste of money to go see this in theaters. However, I will probably never watch it again. So I am trying to watch all the Star Wars content on Disney Plus, because one day I want to tier rank them all. So I'm watching these things because just everything's so interconnected now. I'm just so confused on where to start. So I wrote down everything in the order it came out, and that's the order we're going in. So I watched one of the old movies, Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure. This is a TV movie that came out in the 80s. It came out right after episode 6, and George Lucas was trying to capitalize off the Ewoks, the teddy bear looking thing. So he created a story where this family crash lands on Endor, and the Ewoks were trying to help these two kids find their parents and go home. And this is certainly a movie that exists. I'm either I can't tell if I'm too old for this movie or if it is trash. I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. I did not like this at all. It was boring, and the acting was atrocious, especially the boy. I mean, the little girl was bad at acting too. The boy, I felt like, was trying too hard, and it just came off terribly. They're also, not him, but I'm sure like the costume director was trying so hard to make him out to be another Luke Skywalker, because he kind of, I don't want to, like, they don't have the same face, but the outfit, the hair, you could tell not only were they capitalizing off of Ewoks, but they were capitalizing off of Luke as well. It didn't really give any Star Wars vibes. They had the Star Cruiser, but like that, I would forget they had a Star Cruiser. The outfits were kind of terrible. Like the little girl was clearly wearing clothes from like Macy's or Walmart. You could tell they didn't have a huge budget for this movie, and I understand it's a TV movie, not a theatrical release, but they could have made it a little less obvious. And they were also using real animals and not like the space animals we've grown to love from Star Wars. So it didn't feel like a space movie. I felt like, if anything, rather than a Star Wars movie, I was watching a nature documentary. Because there's a lot of scenes where they're just walking through a forest, and that's it. But yeah, very boring, shit acting, 1 out of 5 stars. Officially the worst movie I watched so far this year. Then I watched The Nun Story. This is about a woman who joins the Order prior to World War II, and it chronicles how she feels about being in the Order from, I think, the 1920s up until World War II was starting. I'm not typically a fan of these types of movies. I think I've talked about a few times on this channel how I have a very hard time with religious-based content. I either love it or hate it. But Audrey Hepburn plays the main character, so I was like, why the hell not? I'll go ahead and watch this. And honestly, it's not that bad. I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. Me and my dad spent the first hour of this movie making jokes about how I absolutely cannot be a nun with those strict ass rules. First of all, they have the grand silence, which means they cannot talk for a certain amount of hours in a day, and I am out. I cannot shut the fuck up. They had to ask permission to drink water between meals. What? I'm not asking permission to do a basic human need. Okay. And then just other things where like they get together at the end of the day and they write all the sins they committed in some book. That would ruin my mental health. Our whole life has to be around Jesus and also helping others. Helping others is obviously not a bad thing, but that does come into play a few times in the movie where our main, what is her name? I forgot what her name was, but Audrey Hepburn's way of helping others wasn't the way the Order wanted her to help people, and that really messed her up a bit. Which leads to my next point on why I found this movie to be actually quite fascinating. It's not that Audrey Hepburn's character was struggling with her faith. She was struggling to be a nun because of her faith. If you're in the Order, whether you're a nun, a monk, a brother, a father, or a priest, I should say, or the Pope, you live a much stricter life than the average Catholic person, and Audrey Hepburn's character really struggled with that. In the Catholic Order, there are rules you have to follow no matter what, so one rule that she struggled with was that as soon as some type of bell rings, they have to stop everything they're doing and go to mass for a certain prayer. There's a scene where she's trying to help a patient by giving, like, I think she was feeding them or something. And 2 other nuns were sweeping. So the bell rings, the 2 nuns who are sweeping stop, they drop the brooms and go, but Audrey Hepburn doesn't stop what she's doing because she's helping someone. And so it begs the question, I guess that's the moral of the movie. What would Jesus do? My idea of Jesus, what would Jesus do? I think he would be forgiving if you don't go to mass because you are helping someone. And Audrey Hepburn's character clearly had that ideal, however, she was stopped and reprimanded for that because she didn't stop what she was doing and go to mass. There are other things in this movie that frustrated her and quite frankly frustrated me. There's the Catholic faith, but then there's individual people. And despite having the same faith, sometimes these individual people don't agree. And she really struggled with that because one nun told her to fail a test for someone. Later in the movie, another nun told her that that was highly inappropriate for the nun to ask of her. So I guess all that is to say too, this movie is incredibly frustrating because you feel for her and you want her to do what she feels is right, but that's the point. That is the point of the movie. You are supposed to be frustrated, so I think they did do a good job at showing that. And the end was really interesting as well because that's when World War II comes into play, and the Catholic Church is quite frankly not looked at in a good light when it comes to World War II because they were asked to remain neutral. And I get it, there was people on both sides, the Allies and the Nazis, who were Catholic. However, again, the big question was, what would Jesus do? And that's what Audrey Hepburn's, not explicitly, but that's what her character, I guess, was asking herself, and I really felt for her. But for many people who grew up in the Christian faith, I feel like we're constantly asking ourselves that. If we're given a tough situation, what would Jesus do? Would he follow word for word the Bible? Or would he make exceptions and do whatever keeps people safe? And honestly, the way she has to ask for forgiveness sometimes, I thought was absolutely ridiculous.
I say my culpa for breaking the rule of obedience, by not stopping work when I heard the bell, for having spilled milk twice in the refectory, for having spoken without necessity during grand silence. I proclaim myself and Sister Luke for seeking each other's company.
Because I'm not doing that for anyone. And when it comes to this movie, I did figure out the end pretty quickly. So for me, this movie was more so the journey and trying to figure out what exactly was going to be her last straw. And I do think it was well written, just it lagged sometimes for me. And again, like this is not typically my type of movie, so that could have been more so a me thing than a writer's issue. But that's why I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars rather than 5 out of 5. But I think this movie is actually pretty excellent discussion on religion and how being religious versus like being how do I word this? An ideology versus the institution, and how those can be two different things, and how that can affect someone. Then the last movie I watched, this video is so long, is the sequel to that Ewoks movie, Ewoks: The Battle for Endor. And this movie is basically about how the first movie was a waste of time because the entire family except the little girl gets killed off within the first 2 minutes. And then it's her trying to save the Ewok planet because some alien thing is trying to take over. I did give this one a better rating, not a good one, but rather than 1 out of 5 stars, I gave this movie 2 out of 5 just because the beginning I thought was a lot more fun and adventurous than the first movie. This movie was off to a good start, but after a while it did start lagging and was boring, and I was constantly checking to see how many minutes I had left. I didn't have to suffer through bad acting with this one. The little girl, sure. I mean, you ever like see a child actor and like you know they're related to someone, or you keep asking yourself like, who are you related to? I have got to believe this little girl just knew someone or was just in this movie as a product of nepotism, but you can't find anything about this actress anymore. So I don't know, but that's just the vibes I get. Like, her acting was, I mean, again, it's not going to be Oscar worthy. It's very much the director telling her what to do and she simply follows without a thought. But the Ewoks were really cute. The monsters did a good job. The aliens do. The makeup in this movie for a TV movie, I thought were pretty good. The guy who plays Lurch in the Addams Family is in it, and you could tell by the brows. But otherwise, anything else about this movie, it's the same issues I had with the first one. And now we're on to TV shows. Alright, so the first TV show I watched in March and actually completed was Attack on Titan, Season 4, Part 3, Part 1. Girl. Wow, this is hard to talk about just because we're so late into the series. But what the series is essentially about is about our main character, Eren Yeager, who lives in a universe where the last of the humans live within these 3 walls so they can avoid being eaten by these giant monsters called Titans. And then Eren joins the military group that goes outside the walls to kill the Titans and figure out the truth of humanity. This episode is hard to talk about without spoiling, and yeah, it is a single episode. Only 2 episodes are coming out this year to complete the series. Each episode is about an hour and a half long. I know there's a lot of issues with the studio change and how they weren't given enough time, so that's why rather than like another season, they're just doing 2 separate longer episodes, and the animation in this episode is stunning. So I could see why they did that, because I could not imagine how overworked those people at MAPPA were, or MAPPA, however it's pronounced, just animating this. Like, this is insane. But I really enjoyed it. I cried like halfway through one of my faves died, so as soon as they died I started crying and just never stopped. The first half of the episode I was just too floored to cry. Kind of spoiler, but we finally see the rumbling. It's so hard for me to believe that there are people who actually support this. It had some brutal imagery and tragically beautiful music that fit well, and the voice acting was bone-chilling. I mean, it's mostly people just screaming, but they're screaming and then there's a type of screaming that makes like your blood boil and then just sends a chill up your spine, and that screaming was the latter, and I truly felt like I was scared. Never has a scene gave me such a sense of hopelessness and despair. Not in just Attack on Titan, but just in all like TV and media in general that I've consumed. I've never felt like such a sense of hopelessness and despair that I did watching this. I truly felt like nothing was gonna go right and there was gonna be no happy ending. Quite frankly, I'm the guy who holds a gun to his head if I'm in this situation, because I see you bitches on Twitter asking, oh, what would you do in situation? Not just for this. Anytime there's like an end of the world sort of thing, you're guys, oh, what are you gonna do in this situation? Fucking dying, bitch. Like, I lost my will to live just watching the scene. What do you mean, what the fuck am I gonna do if I'm actually in this situation? So, I don't know. Some of y'all have like a lot of will to live, and I simply cannot relate. If I was ever in a situation like this, I'm out. I'm going out my own way. But that's all I could say about this episode because I don't want to spoil anything. This is the type of show you want to go in with absolutely no spoilers, so I am going to leave it at that and move on. I am watching The Mandalorian. I'm actually just kind of vibing with this season. I'm not going to get too much into it because I want to save that for the April wrap up. Thank God I watched the Book of Boba Fett so I can understand what the hell is happening. I don't understand why they did that. A huge part of an arc was not solved in The Mandalorian. Even though it should have been, it was solved in another show. And that's really bizarre to me. I do like how we're finally getting more backstory on Mandalore though. And that's it. Moving on. The last TV show I've been watching in March is actually a rewatch. Take a big guess what I'm rewatching. Avatar: The Last Airbender. Listen, I got some really bad news. In one single month, I've been dropped. I had 3 bombshells dropped on me that did not make me happy. So I was very depressed all of March. So I'm gonna cope by watching my favorite show and pretending my problems don't exist. How do you describe what the show's about if you don't know? It takes place in a universe where people can bend the 4 I almost said 3. Can bend the 4 elements: fire, water, earth, air. They all have their own nation, so people can typically bend only 1. However, if you're the Avatar, you can bend all 4. And now these characters are in a war that's 100 years old. Aang, our main character, is the Last Airbender. He's the Avatar and has to stop the Fire Nation from taking over. 3 seasons. Each season has about 20 episodes. As of filming this, I am halfway through the last season. And it's been a fun time. I'm crying more as an adult than when I first watched this show at 12 years old, so it definitely holds up. I'm noticing so many moments of foreshadowing I didn't notice the first time, scenes that are coming together, just like reading between the lines, and it has me absolutely shook, and I'll save some of that for the April wrap-up. But remember when Azula bested a grown-ass man, not only in action but also in words?
You've beaten me at my own game.
Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
She was so real for that. Honestly, I quote that all the fucking time. That had 12-year-old me gagged. But yeah, that's all the TV shows I watched in March, and I will probably be watching Legend of Korra. We will see. And the last thing I want to discuss is a musical that I watched in February, and I saw Les Miserables for the 2nd time. This is my favorite musical of all time, so when I saw it was coming back to Chicago, I bought a ticket right away. And it's so funny because the orchestra seats were cheaper than the nosebleeds, so for the nosebleeds would have been $200 prior to tax, but me and my friend sat in orchestra for $150 a piece after tax. Don't know how that happened, but I'm not complaining. And it was just as good as when I saw it the first time. Everyone's singing was amazing, except for Gavroche. His singing was a little rough, but everyone else did a fantastic job. And I actually cried this time. The first time I didn't cry, but this time just because, I mean, I knew it was coming. I've read the book. I've seen the movies 1,000 times. And obviously I've seen it before. And it was just so funny because the first time I saw it, there wasn't really, like, people weren't crying. But at this production, halfway through the 2nd act, there was like a collective sniffling and everyone was wiping tears away and giving standing ovations at the end. And I thought that was really cool. And it's just something different. Like musicals, I love seeing multiple times just because each production just brings something new, whether it's in the show itself or the audience. And that's it. That's all I have to discuss for this video. Hopefully next month I don't skip it and therefore don't have to put everything in one video again and make it way too long. But let me know down below anything cool that you've been watching. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up, comment, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. Without further ado, I'm gonna peace out and I'll see you guys later. Ciao a tutti.